these things were only ever created to emulate and mimic. Mimic is a better word. Mimic the real thing, music. So you can become a lover of hi-fi, but that's idolatry to me. What we should all be is lovers of music.
Hi folks, welcome to Not an Audiophile, the podcast, episode 11, season 1 still. And today we have part 2 of Ralph Waters' interview, the founder of Richter Acoustics, Richter Loudspeakers. And today he continues some of the saga of travel, and but more about the first models and how they came about and what his design priorities were. And then he follows that up with a somewhat haunting story of a meeting with the Garrott Brothers.
Seeing as we're on a theme here, Brad, of places to sleep that you really shouldn't,
Yeah.
I'd like to share a little anecdote of my own. I went down to, I think it was Sale in Victoria, and we did a week hi-fi show down there, and I travelled down with Peter Stein.
Oh, Steiny.
Yeah. And we went down in his ute, and we packed up fairly late. And we went up the coast, and finally we arrived, and then we crossed over to Canberra. We went over the pretty wild and woolly country up there, and we were getting very tired, and I said, gee, why don't we stop at my sister's house? She lives in Canberra, and we can stop there. We had our sleeping bags with us, so it was about 2 a.m. in the morning, I think, something like that, 2:33, something like that. So I said, yeah, okay. So we went up to her place, and I thought, well, I said to Peter, I don't want to wake my sister up. So why don't we just put our sleeping bags down here in the backyard? And we did that, and we went fast asleep. We were both absolutely stonkered from, these hi-fi shows. And about 6 o'clock in the morning, what I didn't realise is that I was being inundated with icy cold water. And I it turned out my sister had an automated sprinkling system.
Oh, Jesus.
We had about 3 hours sleep or 2 hours sleep or whatever it was. It wasn't much, only to be woken up by this icy cold water. So anyway, that was probably not the best choice of places to sleep. That was what it was like. It was like the Wild West. We were all living on the oil. As Brad said, the smell of an oily rag. And it was touch and go, from week to week, whether we could buy the petrol to put in the car.
Yeah.
And it was hard work, but it was fun. We had so much fun.
We did. There's characters like Vasey Stocks, well, I think that was his name, maybe it wasn't, but it's Ralph, where the Melbourne Hi-Fi show, that same one where the sprinklers came on or the alarms went off. And there's a guy going around, I think it was called Constellation Audio, who was trying to, Ralph, can you remember what he was trying to do? Sign us all up? I think the telltale sign was in the name Constellation, because if you take Stellation out and have just con, that was the word I think that comes to mind. He was a con artist, and he was trying to what was he trying to do? Sign us up to something? He wanted to sort of put us all under that one umbrella. We had the ME amplifier, your speakers, my speakers. Sorry, I'm dominating here. You go ahead, Ruff. Do you remember it?
Well, I recall that he was very well dressed and he very well presented, and he had a business card, and the business card said that he was on something like the 37th level of, a pretty major building in Melbourne. And he was talking to me about buying Richter Acoustics even in those early days, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. He said, we've got investment money available. He said, what we want to do is invest in the Australian HiFi industry, and we would like to become a shareholder in your company. And initially, this was, I recall, it was very, very, you can imagine, like you're a nobody, and then somebody wants to buy half of you. And it was very exciting. But Brad probably can remember in a bit more detail, but over the next 3 days, 2 to 3 days, the conversations became more colourful, more exaggerated, more embellished, and ultimately we realised that he really was completely deluded.
Yes. Yeah.
Was that your recollection, Brad?
Yeah, it was. He was coming in regularly. He was this tall, dark-headed. Yeah, well, we were all reasonably sort of dark-headed in that we didn't have much grey. But he was this young fellow that seemed to sort of have a sort of carried himself well, and he just kept on bombarding us. But it just became weirder and weirder, didn't it? And
It did.
and then you started to realise the name Constellation also had another power effect, because he was out of space. Really, he really was. Playing all these sort of puns, but he really was out there. But that was what it was like. That was exactly what it was like.
Well, it was
in the early days.
It was the start of something, wasn't it? And I guess it was not obvious where it was going. I mean, Ralph, what year did you start to? I mean, I'm assuming at some point you had 10 or 20 dealers across the country. What can you pin a year on that? And what I'm getting at is how many years of hard yards did it take to get a bit of momentum going?
Well, I was very fortunate. I flogged it out for about 18 months. And what I've always been pretty good at is looking around and finding out what's not there. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to find a product that nobody was making or selling. And so I had a bit of a think about it. And I know it sounds incredible to hear this, but in those days, there was no such thing as a twin six.
Yep.
It just didn't exist. All the English speakers had 2 ways, 8-inch, and the American speakers were pretty much 12-inch 3 ways, but there was no twin six at all on the market. And so I thought, well, I'll have a crack at it, and it fell into place very quickly. As a design, it was very, very quick for me to execute, and everybody loved it. And it just sort of went like a rocket ship after that. We made
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
A lot of speakers from that point.
So
the Richter Wizard.
Well, I was going to say, and what was the model? Yeah, it was the Wizard, was it?
Yeah, the Wizard. Yeah.
And was that employing Audax drive units?
What drivers was it using?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I should mention that I was very, very committed to Australian manufacturing, and that's always been my passion. And I worked very closely with a company called Magnavox.
Yeah.
They were an Australian company. They had pioneered Australian drivers, and they had worked closely with Richard Small and Neville Teal. And it was much easier to, my first drivers were Foster, right? Foster. And then I swapped over to include as many Magnavox drivers as I possibly could.
Okay.
And there were 1, 2, 3, 4 models that I was using Magnavox drivers. And it was, so I was very, very committed to using the Magnavox drivers wherever I could. And so that was the drivers in the Wizard were Magnavox and Philips. But over the years, people, I mean, I've used Foster's, Tonigen, Pioneer, Sayers, Peerless, Dynaudio, E-Tone, which was an Australian
Yes,
company,
yeah, yeah.
Oral, Philips, and Audax, and probably a few others as well. There's another couple that I just can't recall. But but my main commitment was to the Magnavox company, and they made a very nice driver. Everything was hand assembled. All the overseas stuff was not hand assembled, apart from I think Peerless. And what it meant was that they were able to get very, very high flux densities in the voice coil,
Okay.
and that made the driver very, very fast. It was a very, very quick driver, and I think that was my signature. I always tried to go for I focused very heavily on transient response on the driver, a transient response in the actual crossover, and transient response of the enclosure. And a very strong focus in my design was always in transient response. And I think a lot of people enjoyed that they had quite a lively sound to them.
Yeah. And on cabinets was since I've got the drive unit thing completely wrong and oversimplified it by suggesting you kind of just used Audax, but which of course is the later models, I guess, that maybe I'm more familiar with. But maybe there was more built of them, I don't know. But what cabinet materials did you have a preference to? What kind of board, or was it heavily braced or not braced, or what? Have you got any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, well, every speaker is constrained by limits. They could be the size, weight, cost of the speaker, availability of materials, cost of materials. There are all sorts of factors which come into play. And so what I would have preferred would have been a heavily braced plywood cabinet.
Mm.
But the fact of the matter was that plywood, in New South Wales anyway, was a very expensive commodity. And it simply wasn't possible. So we just used MDF.
Yep.
But MDF is not a particularly good product for making loudspeaker cabinets. So we tried to brace it as best we could. But still, it's not really an ideal material. So it was always a trade-off, always a compromise.
What's the character of MDF that you feel works against it for loudspeaker cabinet design?
Okay, all materials have a resonance characteristic, which is characterized by the letter Q. And so a high resonance object, like a tuning fork, has a very, very high Q. So you put a little bit of energy into it, and it keeps on ringing and ringing and ringing at a fairly fixed frequency.
Yeah.
The opposite of that would be a piece of plasticine. You can hit a piece of plasticine with a hammer, and it won't ring at all.
Indeed.
It's what like a low Q characteristic. And with MDF, it has this sort of nasty characteristic of resonance, high frequency, mid frequency resonance. So if it's excited, it does tend to colour the sound of the music coming out. Now, in a sealed design, that's not too hard to control because you can fill the box with fiberglass or soft foam. But in a vented design, it's a little bit tricky. So you have to be careful about the shape of your box. Sometimes you got into real strife, like with the taller boxes that we made. I started to divide them up into smaller sub boxes, And in some of the boxes, I put a whopping great bit of foam in the top and the bottom
Yeah.
so that we wouldn't get these standing waves within the enclosure itself. Other boxes, I used wool. Wool was fairly readily available. In those days, there were huge stockpiles of wool, which were being converted into home insulation, would you believe?
Yeah.
And the wool was quite effective at damping resonances down. But it all boiled back to, for me anyway, I was in a very competitive sector of the market, and that market demanded that I had to make a product at a particular price. And so you were constrained about the extent to which you would go to get the product that you wanted. Yeah, so there were limitations there.
But that's the smart end of the market in a way, where you're constrained by costs and availability of materials, and you make the very best with a relatively simple design. I mean, that's where the smarts are at. I mean, anyone can build a $50,000 loudspeaker that sounds pretty good, whereas it's very, very hard to make a $1,500 one that's much chop. Which clearly, well, I mean, of course, in your day, the price points were, as I remember them, something like probably $9.99 for your retail price.
Well, the Wizard actually started out as $499 speaker.
Is that right? Wow. Okay. I guess by the time I
and
noticed,
my retailers complained. They said, "Ralph, why is it so cheap?"
Oh, why is it so cheap?
They did. They complained. They said it's too cheap. I said, I don't get it. I thought my job was to give you the best speaker I could at the cheapest possible price. If it's putting people off, put it up 100, you'll sell more speakers and we'll make more money.
Yeah, okay.
And guess what? I did that and put it up to $5.99, and it sold a lot more.
I thought
perception.
I thought the dealer's response would have been, Ralph, these speakers are too cheap. We'll put them up to $5.99, but keep charging us the same amount. But they actually chipped in and gave you a little more as well. But
yeah.
So
I also realised that I won't get into the marketing, but yeah. So
you won't get into the
I'm
marketing.
I'm not even sure what the question is anymore.
I think the question was really, well, I did ask about cabinet materials, but and you've previously mentioned crossovers. You obviously use air core chokes as much as you could, I guess, and you were using reefer capacitors. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. But with loudspeaker design, the finished product is more than the sum of the components. Just very briefly, my design parameters were, first of all, transient response. I already mentioned that. The second one was distortion.
Mm-hmm.
The third one was dispersion, the maximized dispersion. The fourth one was the tonal characteristics.
Yeah.
And the last one was actually frequency response.
Yeah, okay, so that's very interesting.
Frequency response well down the list, and the way I measured frequency response was very different from what most people did. So I had I think a quite distinctive approach to the way I did it. I should say at this point that I learned an enormous amount from Brad. His attention to detail was staggering and
frustrating and annoying.
No, he's very, very careful. I was a bit more avant-garde, but Brad was quite meticulous about the way he approached things. But overall, the design process for me was focused on things that were very important to me. And the most important thing for me was, did it sound like music? And that was the ultimate test. And a subset of that would be vocal. I'm very, very strong on vocal. Did female voice particularly sound natural? And those were things which, for me, it was always the last step. If I had a speaker that didn't sound natural in the vocal region, I would scrap it.
Yeah.
And start again. And I made a few dogs too, I should say. But I learned very quickly that if you make a dog, the best thing to do is to shoot it and bury it.
Yeah.
Or not,
Put it down.
not bring out a Mark II version.
Right.
Yeah. Shoot the dog, bury it, and forget it ever existed.
Bad dog.
Yeah, bad dog. Yeah, bad dog.
So so on that subject though, what was your, did you have a favourite child, so to speak? Not that you should perhaps mention which one it is, but I'd love it if you did.
I never did like any of the speakers that I made.
Oh, hang on. Let me just.
He loved them.
he loved
He did just,
So-
like any child that you might not bear, but your own child, you don't like them, but you love them. Maybe.
Maybe.
What do you mean by that, Ralph?
But I love them dearly, but I didn't like them much.
Okay, you heard it here first. And why is that? Because it was a commercial decision to make money, and you would have built something else for your own listening, or
It was
what?
never about making money. It was never about making money for me. It was the fact that one of the great delusions of the hi-fi industry is that they're actually making things which sound like music.
Great point.
I have never heard a speaker that sounded like music, with possible exception of one.
Okay.
One.
What's
in
that,
my
Ralph?
whole- Well, it was a speaker that I can't even remember the name of. It was a guy from Launceston.
The
He
electricity,
had a-
what?
Yeah, they were not electrostatic. They were electro. I forget what they used. It was about 7 foot tall, and they were using ribbons, and
Oh, God.
they were so exciting and so real. They were really magnificent, and I never heard what happened to them, but maybe Vasey Stocks invested in them. I don't know. But the fact is that there is no speaker that does justice to a piano or a human voice. We pretend, all we're doing when we're listening to a loudspeaker is that we're creating an illusion. And when we listen to a loudspeaker, we are allowing that illusion to govern our perception.
Well, basically, you're saying we're sonic illusionists. That's the trick. We're tricking. We're trying to trigger the memory.
Well,
What we've
the
heard
main thing is that we're trying to fool ourselves.
Yeah.
Like if you go into a like listen to a drum being played, set of drums, and you listen to it on a loudspeaker, it's a very, very diminished, very compromised sound. Or if you listen to a brass band live, or if you listen to anything actually, it's very hard to get a speaker that's a good emulation of the real thing. So you've just got to accept the fact that there's nothing that you will design that will ever fully satisfy.
Right.
And the people that believe that they've got the perfect speaker, I think, spend too much time listening to speakers instead of listening to music.
Oh, yeah. There'd be a bit of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I suppose what you're
And
saying
we
then, Ralph, in a sense,
we shouldn't let our love of speakers or high five displace the obvious reality that these things were only ever created to emulate and mimic. Mimic is a better word. Mimic the real thing, music. So you can become a lover of hi-fi, but that's idolatry to me. What we should all be is lovers of music.
Yeah.
And on that
Great
note,
point, Ralph.
we'll have a quick break and we'll be right back. Hello, Andrew here from Delacord Loudspeakers, and yet again pushing out our own barrow on a podcast that I'm involved with. But hey, we could always get some other advertisers. Get in touch. The email address is, what is the email address? Not an audiophile podcast at gmail.com. It's not hard to remember. Not an audiophile podcast at gmail.com. Get in touch and give us your read or tell us what to read. Slip us a couple of shekels and we'll read it out. And then you can get rid of these Delacord ads. So back to Delacord. 70S, new model released at the show. A fantastic sound. The people who came in the room and listened were like, how much? $16.99? And it sounds like that? Yes, and that's because we prioritise sound quality. We also did another trick. $16.99, you don't actually get an assembled enclosure. You have to assemble it yourself. Yes, from scraps you might find around the house. No, that's not true. We give you a birch ply set of panels that we, of course, cut out on our very expensive Australian-made CNC routing machine, and you can glue them together. The rest is done. The drivers, screws, T-nuts, an assembled crossover with cable and connectors all included. You simply fit it together. Or if you really feel that that is too much trouble and your busy schedule of sifting through Instagram, etc., is going to get in the way of you being able to knock that together, or a lack of tools or experience, then quite rightfully buy a finished, completed version, the, as we say, the ready-to-paint version or the ready-to-listen version. The best way to get in touch and get further details is actually to email us at stereotechmfg@gmail.com. Stereotechmfg, that's Mike Fox Golf, short for manufacturing, @gmail.com. The email address is on the stereotech.com.au websites or the delacord.com.au websites. Get in touch. We'll send you a 5-page PDF with all of the details.
We can look at a pond still, like Monet did some great pond paintings with willow trees and lilies, but when you see that particular painting at the French gallery and see the natural light coming and hitting that those paintings, and it just pops off the bloody canvas, and you go, shit, that looks good, but it's not real. So it's more, we're impressionists. That's what we are.
Exactly right. We're saying it's great sound. It's not real, but it's great.
It's a painting.
And you've got to be honest
about
about
painting.
that.
It's a sonic painting. Geez, I'm wanking on, but it's a
Exactly
sonic
right.
painting.
Amen. Yep.
I went in, Ralph, just because we're not recording, I went into the Museum of d'Orsay, as I like to say, and in Paris.
We are
and
recording,
I saw.
I'm back recording again.
Oh, okay, you bastard. I'll never get going into that.
But you can keep talking. Keep going.
Anyway, okay. So I went into that particular gallery and saw a whole lot of impressionists, Ralph, up on the wall. Monet, Manet, Jeu de Beurre, and Geneva, whatever. And when I saw them for the first time and saw the natural light that came into the room and the way it hit those brushstrokes and the way the light dispersed, it was almost like on some of the Monets, the actual visual effect was that it went beyond the picture frame, and it sort of popped. It was quite amazing. So, and I thought, and then other paintings didn't quite do it. Other artists didn't quite capture it for me. So it's a subjective thing, but it made me emote. I had an emotional response to those paintings, thinking, "Oh my God, that's amazing." Obviously, if I saw that same pond at that time when he painted it, it's a totally different thing. It's not. It's a sort of alteration or a version of reality where it's an impression. That's why they're called impressionists, I suppose. It was amazing.
I think your analogy, Brad, is excellent because
poorly told, albeit
well,
poorly
may or maybe not. But I agree from the point of view that perhaps the best loudspeaker is just the one that is clearly the more emotional, creates a stronger emotion to listen to it. I mean, it's as Ralph, of course, rightly points out, you can't get the sense of scale, dynamics, the cleanliness, the maintain the harmonic structure, all of those things, the attack. You know, it's all much smaller and distorted compared with an original. But if you can do it in such a way that it doesn't, the failings don't distract too much, and just
Look, I think that if you ever get to the point where you say, I'm happy with that speaker, you're about to end your career as a speaker designer.
Yeah.
Wow, well said.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll amen to that too. And at some point, my partner will be listening to this podcast and writing down who's mentioned in it and so forth, and she'll hear that, and then she'll understand why I keep fiddling with stuff. But because, I mean, it really is, it's a bit like panning for gold, I guess, or something, isn't it? I mean, you really are looking for that. Well, you won't find a nugget by panning, but you know what I mean, digging for gold. I mean, you remain hopeful that you will find that giant nugget. I mean, is that something that you tired of, or something, Ralph? I mean, you've not. I mean, I don't know whether you play with speakers much these days at all for your own amusement, but I mean, I know you wrote those series of articles some years ago, which are very informative for those, and we'll have a link to those on the website. But so you still obviously have a strong interest.
Well, I've taken up painting a couple of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and that is very interesting to me. I'm very interested in impressionistic painting, actually. So that's been wonderful. That's really opened up I never thought I had a skerrick of artistic ability, and discovered that I actually quite like it, and so that's been interesting. Now the question was, where did Brad and I meet?
Well, it was at the start an hour and a half ago.
Oh, was it? I thought it was just a couple of minutes ago.
Oh,
I
you
thought
know,
that was the question.
time rushes past.
Okay, I don't.
It's because
Well, I still can't remember.
Bastard.
Just while you can't remember, Ralph, or in that, I do remember one thing though, that Andrew, I can't remember exactly what year. Maybe it was 1990. Ralph galvanized a few of the other manufacturers to join forces with him, to kickstart a thing called OzFi, the Australian Hi-Fi Manufacturers Guild.
Mm-hmm.
And Ralph, through his speakers getting reviewed by a guy called David Frith in the Pink Guide for the Sydney Morning Herald, got to know David, and then I think, Ralph, didn't you get David Frith to write a story about OzFi with a group of Aussie manufacturers working together to do hi-fi shows, etc.? I'll let you fill it out. You probably remember better than me.
Yeah, I'm very should acknowledge David Frith, because he gave all of the Australian manufacturers a really good run for their money. He was a journalist for the Sydney Morning Herald, and instead of scoffing and jeering, he actually supported us. And he supported what we were trying to do. He was a lovely fellow, David. I enjoyed his company immensely. And he really helped us extraordinarily in those early days. And he was also a great supporter of OzFi. So it was good to get that kind of support, because what happened was that people started flocking back to the hi-fi shops, inquiring about the brands, inquiring about OzFi, inquiring about taking an interest in Australian-made product. And I remember Len Wallace in the very early days, he said to me, a lovely guy, Len, he said to me, Ralph, I will sell your speakers when people come into my store asking for your speakers. And true to his word, we were able to create enough interest around the topic that people started to flow into his store. And Len was always a man of his word. He stocked my speakers from that time forward. But OzFi helped us. We did quite a few shows. Did a couple of shows at Darling Harbour, and that gave us great exposure. The OzFi was a very important thing. I've got a bit of an anecdote about OzFi, if you've got time.
Sure.
Yes,
In the
please.
very, very early stages of OzFi, I thought, well, who have we got? And the first name that came to mind was the Garrett Brothers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I rang up the Garrett Brothers and I said, look, could I please come up and talk to you about OzFi, what we're trying to achieve and so on and so forth. And so I went up there and I had probably one of the most interesting, if not disconcerting, afternoons of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a very, very strange situation. I walked in there and it was very, very clear that from the moment I arrived that it didn't matter who I talked to in the room, that I think the older fellow, John, I think it was, answered every single question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd ask a question of Brian, and the two wives were there.
Okay.
And all of the questions were answered from John.
Yeah.
And it was very disconcerting. It was quite strange, and it unnerved me. And all over the place were these little love notes. Darling, I love you, and then yes, I love you too, and there were the Garrett brothers were, I suppose, in their late 40s, and they had two Filipino brides. They were about, I don't know, early 30s, I guess, very early 30s, and they were strutting around in little tiny hot pants, very thin singlets, and over the course of the afternoon, I couldn't work out which woman belonged to which brother.
Yeah.
Right.
Because every time I looked, there was a different wife sitting on another person's knee.
Oh dear. Okay.
And anyway, at the end of the afternoon, I got virtually nothing from anyone except the eldest brother. And I thought, this is I felt a bit creepy, actually, the whole thing. And I walked out of there, and of course, John's final words to me was, I'm very happy to join OzFi on one condition. I said, great, what's that? He said, I will be the head of OzFi.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, what have we bought into here? Well, it was rather sad because not long after, a couple of years later, I think it was, they were found, and the whole four of them had committed suicide.
Indeed.
John was ill,
Okay.
not terminally. He just had a faulty heart valve and could have easily been rectified with surgery. But what happened was that they made a pact.
Yeah.
And they all lay down on the one bed together, and they all committed suicide together. Well, yeah, a dual suicide is very, very rare, and a quad suicide is almost unheard of. And the coroner investigating it interviewed their doctor, and the doctor down at Bega said it was very strange. He said, because if I asked John a question, he would not answer it unless he conferred with his brother and the other two wives. And she said, I felt like I was talking to one organism.
Yeah.
Jesus. Wow.
And that's exactly the impression I had. of the time with the Garrett brothers that I was talking to one person. It's as if they had all coalesced and enmeshed into one personality. And I realised once the Garrett brothers were all found dead with their wives, what I'd really walked into was a cult.
I was just about to say that, Ralph. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's an insight into how cults work, I guess, is that they all become, like you say, one organism. There's that's the unnerving and odd thing about it, other than what they ultimately did, which was a story that I was aware of.
Jonestown.
Yeah, well, that's right,
exactly.
Yeah, it was like a mini version. It's no one talks about it.
In a way, it reminds me of the old sci-fi thing from Star Trek, the Borg, where all the organisms are sort of linked in a way. But I'm not taking the piss in that sense. It sounds, as you said, Ralph, they were inextricably linked as one almost one personality. It's sad and amazing.
It is. It was, and it was. I've still got my Garrett cartridges, by the way. I got a P77 and a P66 cartridge sitting here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it was sad, tragic, and for me it was very unnerving because, and you know what, the HiFi industry, I found intensely interesting for the fact that the vast majority of the people involved in the industry were quirky, were peculiar, were esoteric, were extremely individualistic, were colourful, were in many occasions utterly bizarre.
When you say were, you're implying that this has changed.
Well, I don't know if it's changed, but I sure know this, that I had more. I used to walk in some pretty interesting circles in those days, artists and sculptors and so forth. But I think that compared to them, the hi-fi mob eclipsed
the artists.
We've talked about Vasey Stocks. We've talked about the Garrett brothers. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I can assure you.
It gets worse.
Yeah. And then there's Ralph Waters and Brad.
Now we're talking. Oh dear. Yeah, it's funny, Ralph, not funny in the slightest, Ralph, but it's very interesting that you had a personal experience with the Garrett brothers because as much as I knew the tale, I had and there was the word cult thrown around, but I don't know whether that was an official thing, but certainly you experienced it firsthand. I'm not sure a hell of a lot of people did because I feel like because they were involved with cartridges that they were like mailing them in and out. I'm not sure that anyone went there much. Is that your thought? Because I've never heard or never spoken to anyone who'd met them until now.
Yeah, one of the girls' mothers at the inquest said that she felt that her daughter had been programmed to basically satisfy whatever it was that her husband wanted of her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I felt like. I felt like I was walking into three ultimatums.
Wow.
And one
and
one talking head. That's what it felt like.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a great insight into what is a horrid story, really. But I mean, you obviously walked away from there that day. And sometimes humans have. I mean, I know I've had things like that where I've walked away from someone and thought, well, I'll never speak to them again because I feel like they. They're an older person and they've reached the end of their life or something like that. I mean, I just feel like I'm not going to see them again. That's happened a few times and I don't know why. And I guess it's, but in this case, it was an obvious. I mean, you felt something because it was quite obvious. I mean, that things were not normal. When you drove away that day, other than thinking, "Wow, that was weird and disturbing," did you have any other thoughts? I mean, you didn't think for a second, I guess, that they were within a year or two going to do what they did.
Well, I'm glad they didn't come on board because I think they would have been problematic.
Mm.
And but they made it very clear that they had a disdain for everyone actually.
Wow.
Yeah. I can. Do you remember the Pyramide? Sorry to interrupt, but Pyramide had a Pyramide Hi-Fi shop had a sort of a big audio weekend, or was it an evening, Ralph, at the RSL in Burwood, and the Garrett Brothers were there. Were all set up demonstrating various gear. I think it was under an OzFi banner as well. Do you remember them being there at that particular event? Because I can remember the girls running around with South Sydney football jerseys on, but they didn't really engage with anyone. But by golly, their products were good.
Oh yeah, their products are great. So that's an example of the wonderful zany world of hi-fi.
Zany.
It was madcap. It was mayhem. It was wonderful. It was fantastic. It was a story that you would never have thought of writing yourself because it was mostly unimaginable.
Mm.
Yeah,
it was terrific. And Brad, for me anyway, he was he was the very best of what hi-fi offered. Love of music, intelligent, and made a wonderful, wonderful product. And yeah, they were. I've got
thanks, Ralphie.
a lot of. They were halcyon days for me in many respects. But
yeah, they were really enjoyable, Ralph. And but what out of that sort of laughter and adversity, we I think that helped us forge, get stuck into speaker design, and that was part of the enjoyment to be able to sort of do these shows, and you kickstarting OzFi was a huge thing. It did help us establish ourselves with the likes of, as you said, Lem Wallace and Lem Wallace Audio. So you were the one that kickstarted OzFi, and that all helped. You were the icebreaker, if you like.
yeah, Peter Stein, actually, his wife Tina designed the banner, and
Peter's wife did that. I forgot that. Wow.
He did the logo. And
Who did the logo? I can't.
yeah, Tina Stein.
Tina. There you go. And it was the sort of the sales of the Opera House, wasn't it? We had to get permission from the Sydney Opera House, didn't we? There's a bit of
well, the Opera House threatened to sue us because we used a logo of the Opera House, but we simply ignored that, and they went away.
Because the Opera House logo was looked like sails, didn't they, Ralph? So we just sailed through it, didn't we?
And the fact is that I think that in life, if you ignore things long enough, they tend to go away. So silence is a great.
Trying to sue the very thing that's trying, Anyway. Oh dear.
Yeah, it's trying to promote you anyway. So
the important thing is that you made that was, well, I always felt that you sort of, by forging the OzFi connection, it sort of got sort of a band of audio brothers, sisters, and audio definition with Glenn and Leah. They came on board. Ron Cooper, the marvelous Ron Cooper from what was his audio? What was his brand, Ralph? The good old Ronnie Cooper joined us. from Curl in the northern beaches of Sydney. Some real characters, but it did help us establish the sort of that Australian audio is worth listening to.
Yeah, it was. It gave us confidence. It gave us an identity. It gave us a marketing power, and it was. It served its purpose well, I think, at the time.
Yeah, indeed.
And I guess, to wrap up today, Ralph, at some point you clearly sold the business. Do you wish to elaborate how that came about, or you've already stated that you resigned from your excellent position with a free car, and then not being quite sure what you were going to do next, and ended up obviously founding Richter Acoustics. But when it came time to go, was it just like, nah, I've had enough of this, or what were your thoughts?
Well, it was not a happy time in my life because my marriage fell apart.
Oh, okay.
And I was forced to sell Richter. Yeah, I was forced to sell Richter as a consequence of that.
Okay.
And yeah, so it wasn't, if you like, a happy ending. It was a matter of necessity.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I'm glad I brought that up. Sorry about that, Ralph. That's so. I mean,
hang on a second. I'm just reaching for the tissue box over here, bro.
I'm sending you some.
Does Andrew always like to make people cry? Is that his?
Oh, I have a skill.
Yeah.
I have a skill.
What?
No, I'm sorry, Ralph. I had no idea. The thing is, I was going to say, Brad, the brand, of course, has changed owners a number of times, and it seems that it's actually, it's travelled along very nicely. It's had a great history and continues to be a well.
Yeah,
it's
of course.
It's the same force that it was when you started, in the sense that it was a marvellous value for money loudspeaker at an affordable price point, and it remains that. But do you? I mean, you could buy it back. Maybe it's for sale sometime in the future.
No.
Okay.
Look, I had about a 15-year period from probably. I was intensely involved for about 20 years, from about 1974 through to about for 20 years.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And in the year 2000, I left it all behind, and I started a new phase of my life. And this phase of my life is very different and very satisfying.
Yep.
And I'm extremely happy with that. It was a great chapter. But I have absolutely no desire to revisit it.
Good plan.
And just quickly, Andrew, I have to throw in a couple of things because, well, I just have to. I don't know why. Just memories of Ralph going down for the what we used to call the design days, or basically R&D, just throwing stuff together and learning. And Ralph was innovative. I love his approach. The fact, let's have a look at this particular bass driver, and we'd be putting different types of doping compound on, or putting little globs of blue tack in certain parts of the driver to determine what was happening with the breakup modes in the driver cone, and measuring it and listening to it. So, in that sense, he was inventive, creative, and also listening to the speakers raw with filters, and it was a lot of fun, but also learning as well. So you're definitely innovative, Ralph. To piss in your pocket politely, and I hope the warm feeling.
What's that warm, wet feeling?
That's right. Well, you deserve it. You deserve all that warmth. But no, seriously, what I'm trying to say, Andrew, is that he made a huge difference for me because we could collaborate, although we were slightly in competition, but it didn't matter really. We just sort of celebrated if we both managed to get a hi-fi shop and get some sales. And we managed to forge a bit of a market for ourselves with the various shops take us on. And, that first, I remember the Twin Six. I think you're right, Ralph. There weren't many. I don't remember any Twin Six floor standers being around at the time. So I dutifully copied or mimicked that a few years later as well. So thanks, Ralph. So
I think.
Well, that's good. As far as I'm concerned, that when I saw it, I thought, oh, that's great, because it lends credibility to my design. It means that we've now consolidated that particular configuration as a legitimate design. So it was all good. The way Brad did things was very different from me, and we were quite distinctive in the way we approached things. So it was never a matter of, for me, it was never a matter of competing. It was always a matter of, ultimately it was all about music for me, for sure.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, as it kind of should be. Hey, on that note, I think, Ralph, you've given us a magnificent wrap-up of your thoughts on both design and life, and some great tales of how it was, and just for clarification, I believe the life that your next stage of life was to become a farmer of some description, and I'm not actually sure what kind, but I know cows are involved. So, I mean, just for completion, do you wish to elaborate on what kind of farming if that's in fact what you're doing?
Okay, well, what I decided was that when we came up here, my wife and I, Jo, been married for nearly 30 years, Brad. How about that?
God, my God.
Amazing. What happened? We're both very, very interested in self-sustained living.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have very interested in growing fruit and veggies. We've always had 2 milking cows here, but we for a variety of reasons, we recently sold them. We have sheep. We have sheep for the table. We have quite a lot of chooks and eggs. We've got a great sort of citrus orchards. We've got fruit trees of one kind or another, and we've got grapevines, and we've got fig trees, and we've got. We're not completely self-sufficient, but we are fairly self-sufficient. And we're self-sufficient on power.
Okay.
We've got both on-grid and off-grid systems here. So yeah, it's a different project, and it's a different lifestyle. And we do a huge amount of entertaining. I've never been so busy in my life. We get non-stop visitors.
Okay.
And we have an extremely social life. It's very rewarding, and I love the life up here. I'm so glad I came up here. It's wonderful.
Well, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
It sounds fantastic, and I'm glad you're enjoying life. And look, I really thank you again, as I know Brad does, for taking your time out of your day to enthrall us really with the history of yourself and the brand. And so thank you again. Really, really appreciate it. Ralph Waters, and of course ably assisted by Brad.
It's been very enjoyable to have a bit of a chat. And but there's only one downside to this conversation for me, and that is I think I'll be tormented to the day that I die on not being able to remember when I met Brad.
I don't think you will.
At last you're tormented. That's what I'm just happy about. And not fermented, hopefully. So, mate, thanks for that, Ralph. Really appreciate you coming on board.
Okay.
Thanks, Ralph.
Thanks, Ralph.
Okay, mate. See ya. Thanks, guys.